What happens when a woman is stripped of her inheritance, her name and her home? Simply because she wasn't one of them. When they push her into the shadows, hoping she'll disappear forever. What she did next left even the most powerful completely silent. I'm not the kind of guy who goes for the good in the eye. But that day, don't ask me why I made coffee for 3. To myself, my father, and the woman who raised me but never learned to say my name without straining. It was my way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still trying. And you know what I got in response? Silence. Silence where coffee goes cold faster than resentment. My father sat at the window overlooking the old road and pretended to read the newspaper. He always did that when he wanted to hide from conversation. And my stepmother, God, that woman could go a year without saying my name, but today she decided to remember that I exist. Look, Sharon. She began, and I already knew something tacky was going to follow, like a fake compliment or a venomous kindness. Don't call me Sharon if you're not going to talk business. I cut her off. Because at my age, if you don't call things by their proper names, they start to stink. I didn't come back to this house for the money. I came back because my grandfather died. And with him, the last thread that connected me to who I could have been if it wasn't for these people and their family stuff. My grandfather left a will, and by some quirk of fate, I was invited to the reading. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe an old letter or a pocket watch. But certainly not what happened. The office was on the other side of town. Old with a peeling sign and the smell of paper that hadn't been touched in 10 years. There were already 3 people sitting in the room. A lawyer, a woman with a clipboard, and my father. Of course. He came. He always comes when it's about control, not feelings. The lawyer introduced himself quickly, Michael Green, a dry type with eyes like a fish's, gliding without lingering. He opened the envelope, read the preamble and issued. Gerald Henderson leaves to his granddaughter Sharon Ellis the full amount in his trust account of $38 million, as well as the right to dispose of the family land and archives. Silence. Dead silence. Even the air conditioner seemed to die down. I didn't believe it. To believe is to admit that you're the one who has to explain yourself now. And I was tired of explaining myself. Dad chuckled. Like he'd swallowed a dry bone. There must be some mistake, he said. It's a signed and certified document, the lawyer countered. I didn't look at him. I was looking at the window. It was raining. And it looked to me like the sky was laughing. Later, when everyone was out, my father came up to me. Without a word, without making a move. He had a white envelope in his hand. He took out a check and set it on fire right in front of me. 38 million. It went up in flames. And gone. And me? I just smiled. Because if you're standing in front of a man who thinks he can burn your life down with a piece of paper, you've already won. I didn't leave there in heels or with my head held high. I just walked. Across the parking lot, in shoes that got soaked in the first 5 minutes because no one told me the forecast wasn't a joke. My phone in one hand, my keys in the other, which were shaking as if they weren't keys at all, and my nerves were on edge. At home, everything was the same as always. The TV that broadcasts in vain, the smell of old furniture, and the feeling that you live in a museum where everything is under glass, but the glass has long since cracked. Dad didn't come back, of course. He left without saying a word, as usual. I guess it's a family thing, leaving at just the right moment. And I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my palms to my temples as if I could squeeze an explanation out of my head. Why me? Why now? Why did Grandpa even remember me? The text came at 10 o'clock at night. No signature. Just an address. Henderson Farm. Tomorrow. 11 o'clock. It'll be important. That's it. No details. Just that. Like being in a thriller where the heroine is too tired to be afraid. The next morning I drove. Black highway, fog, sparse cars. The farm looked like it had been cut out of a postcard. Forgotten in the sun and faded. An old house, the roof half alive, windows with dusty curtains. A swing that swings by itself, wind or spirits, I don't know. I was met on the doorstep by a man who looked like that lawyer but younger. He introduced himself as Thomas, the new personal injury attorney. Sounded like I was someone else's problem. He showed me the house, opened the creaky door, and we went inside. The first thing that caught my eye was the portrait. Huge framed, dusty. On it was grandfather, young in uniform, with eyes that had too much light in them for a man who had lived such a dark life. And underneath the portrait is the fireplace. And on it was the same picture of me as a child, in my grandmother's arms. I stood looking at it as if I were seeing myself outside for the first time. "It's all yours," Thomas said. And I thought, what's the use? What good is a house if there isn't a single door that leads to the truth? But I stayed, because something in me said, if you're going to do this, find out the rest of it. I spent the day at the farm. I went through drawers, touched books, looked at photos that no one had touched in years. On each one are faces, some familiar, others like phantoms. But in one frame I recognized something else. A photo from the 60s, black and white. A woman with a baby in her arms. And next to her a grandfather. Only the woman wasn't a grandmother. And the baby, judging by the time, is me. I stood there with this picture in my hands, and everything inside clenched. Who is this woman? Why had I never met her? Why had I never once in my entire life been told that I had a past before our family? Thomas was saying something, showing me the keys to the garage, to the storage room, to the basement, but I couldn't hear. I was somewhere else. Inside the picture. Inside my head, where a vacuum had suddenly formed. If everything I knew about myself was a lie, where did the truth even begin? "Excuse me, Miss Ellis, are you feeling okay?" "Me?" I looked up. "I feel like someone who's been sold a fake truth all his life." "Do you think that happens a lot, Thomas?" He faltered. "I'm just an attorney. I don't have access to the family archives. But if you want, I can give you the coordinates of the archives." I grinned. "The archives? Are you serious? I've got $38 million on my hands here, and you want me to go through cardboard boxes to figure out who I am?" He didn't say anything, and I clutched the picture and put it in my bag. When I got home, and the house still smelled, you know what it smelled like? Like someone had burned a family secret in the fireplace and left ashes in every corner. My father was waiting for me. He was sitting in the very room where he'd once burned a check, holding something that looked like a scrapbook. "I thought you weren't coming back," he said. "I didn't come back for you. I came back for answers." He opened the scrapbook. Old newspaper clippings, letters, strange telegrams. He showed me one of them. The date was 1986. Signed, Rachel Henderson. There's a letter congratulating me on the birth of my daughter, Sharon. Named her after her grandmother. May she grow up free. "Rachel?" I whispered. He nodded. "No joy. No guilt. Just tired. Your mother. The real one. She died. And I didn't know how to live with it. Laura agreed to help. To be everything she wasn't. I wanted to protect you. Too much. I didn't answer. Because my mind was blank. And then everything just fell into place. Not the grandfather, not the lawyer, not the farm, it was all just background. The main conflict had been there. All his life. And now that he'd said it out loud, I suddenly realized that I didn't have to carry someone else's pain any further. I got up. I walked over to the fireplace. And I said, "You burned that check. But now you've burned your power over me. No longer am I part of your story. Now you're just a footnote in mine." I went up to my old room. Everything was in place, but everything was foreign. The bookshelf where my magazines used to stand was now littered with my grandmother's porcelain figurines. The bed was made up with a quilt with flowers I hated as a child. This was not my home. It was a stage set where I played the role of the handy daughter. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled a picture out of my bag. I stared at it for a long time. At some point it seemed to me that the woman in the picture was smiling not at the camera, but directly at me. As if she knew that all you need is not money, not a house, not even an apology. All you need is to know who you are. I got up. I went to the mirror. And I said it out loud. My name is Sharon. And I'm not a mistake. I am not someone's shadow. And I am not someone's compensation. With those words I took the ring off my hand, the family ring, the heavy one, and put it on the dresser. Because I'd finally realized that belonging to something doesn't mean obeying it. And let the house stay with them. Let the money lie in silence. And me? I'll go where the truth doesn't smell like burning. Where my name isn't wiped from my memory like a stain from an upholstery. I'm not part of this lie. And I never will be again. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how it unfolded. When I opened my eyes the next morning, The sun was beating through the window like it wanted to shake me out of bed. Only I'm not the kind of person who can be lifted by a single light. Especially after a night when you find out that your real mother isn't the woman who stood at the stove all your childhood. And your father isn't just the silent one, but the master architect of your switch. I made myself a coffee. Just one. No one else. Not because I'm angry, just tired of feeding those who burn your truth at every opportunity like they burned that check. Yeah, I still remembered it. Not because of the money, but because it was like a flag. Here's your whole life and we're going to ash it. Catch it. I was sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, bare feet on the warm boards, when I saw a dusty car approaching down the road. It was Thomas. Again with that face polite and unconcerned, like he's a waiter at an expensive restaurant, but the food has long since been spoiled and he just doesn't know how to mention it. He came out with a clipboard and an envelope. Again. I was starting to dream about those envelopes. Miss Ellis, we have a request. The Henderson family, your uncle's side, has filed a lawsuit. They're asking for a revision of the will. They claim you're not entitled to inherit because you can't prove direct descent. That made me chuckle. So when I was a shadow in the corner, no one cared whose daughter I was. And as soon as my uncle's cash flow was cut off, I suddenly became the wrong one? It's a technicality. We'll file a counterclaim. Thomas, you know this isn't about money. It's about crossing me off again. First my father. Then my stepmother. Now it's the uncle. They're taking turns to see if I can take it. He looked at me like I had a broken radio, but I couldn't understand the words. I need to know, are you ready to go all the way? Court, press, publicity? I stood up. I came closer. And looking straight into his politely wrinkled soul, I said, Thomas, these people have spent 40 years pretending I don't exist. And now they want me to apologize for even being born? Believe me, I have an answer for that. I signed the paper. With one stroke. And I didn't flinch. Then I spent the rest of the day in the farmhouse archives. And yes, it wasn't a library with bronze shelves and plaques. It was an old barn with boxes, dust, cobwebs and mice that seemed to be the old tenants, if not the rightful owners. But it was here that I found the letters. Letters to my mother. Rachel had written to my grandfather. Before I was born. About fears. About love. About being afraid Richard would run away. About how he didn't want a baby. And then the labor. The pain. And then the letters are cut off. The last one is just a note. I know you won't forgive me, but please take care of her. I can't take it anymore. I sat on the barn floor with dust in my hair and tears on my cheeks that didn't scream. They were just coming. And I whispered, Mom, I'm here. I didn't disappear. I've grown up. I understood. I've forgiven you. I haven't forgiven myself yet, but I'm trying. And then, just then, I felt not anger. I felt strength. Not the kind that tears everyone apart, but the kind that gets up off its knees, wipes its hands, looks in the mirror and says, you deserve to live out loud. Not a whisper. I gathered up the letters, put them in a box, and drove into town. Tonight was the reading at the law review board. They wanted my word. My decision. And I was ready to say everything. With no bills. No falsehoods. Because if the family decided to put on a show, they didn't expect the lead role to be taken by someone they were trying to cut out of the script. The boardroom was as cold as my stepmother's smile. Walls painted sterile beige. A long table, microphones, people in glasses with faces like they'd never been wrong. And in the center is me. Not the lawyer. Not a businessman's daughter. Just a woman who was tired of being silent. Miss Ellis, said someone with glasses, are you sure you want to do this publicly? I looked at him like a man asking a burning house if it wanted some water. And are you sure you want to go on living in a world where a woman has to prove she has a right to her own name? He coughed. He didn't seem to have an answer. I pulled out the box. The very letters. Spread them out on the table like cards. And I started talking. About the mother who was stolen from me. My father who burned not only the checks, but the pages of my life. About people who are called relatives, but only when you're a source of something convenient to them. I spoke as if the walls in this room had heard the lies for too long, and were waiting for someone to finally tell the truth. I sounded like Rachel. Sharon's voice. The voice of someone who had survived amidst the ashes. Someone on the panel asked, don't you think you're sounding a little emotional? Don't you think this is supposed to be emotional? This isn't a tax return. This is my life. After the meeting, a woman came up to me. Gray-haired, green jacket. Said quietly, "I knew Rachel. She was brighter than everyone in this room put together. And she would have been proud of you." I nodded. Because if I opened my mouth, no words would come out. Only tears. And I'm on my limit for today. Later at home I found another envelope. No stamp, no address. Just on the floor by the door. Inside a note. "You weren't supposed to find this." No signature. That's when I knew it was gonna get real. Because the truth is like a fire. Once it's started, someone will try to put it out. But the problem is I was no longer the one hiding from the smoke. I'm the flame. The next day, it was as if the farm knew the storm was coming. The sky was gray, the wind whispering something into the roof, every door creaking. I woke up earlier than usual, my heart was restless. Something was wrong. And I wasn't wrong. There were footprints on the gate. A man's heavy. By the door, a crumpled coffee carton, the kind my father drank. I picked it up, smelled it fresh. He was here. I wasn't afraid. You know why? Because fear is when you don't know what you're capable of. And I already knew. I've lived everything I was afraid of. Betrayal, rejection, lies. The rest was just secondhand smoke. I went into the house. The kitchen was untouched except for one detail. The fireplace. In it, someone had tried to burn another box. The papers were burnt around the edges, but the lines inside were still legible. I pulled them out. They were documents. A letter from my grandfather. His handwriting was the same handwriting he'd used on the children's postcards. He'd written about Rachel. About how my father had threatened to take me away forever if my grandfather said a word about my real mother. "I chose silence," he wrote, "because I thought you would find your own way someday. I had no right to stop you from suffering less." I clutched the letter to my chest. Didn't cry. Just stood there, listening to the wind outside the window blowing away the remnants of the past. In the afternoon, the police arrived. Thomas insisted I file a threat report. But they just shrugged. "With no witnesses, no camera, we can't help you." Of course, I grinned. A woman with an inheritance and a burned past isn't the most important category, is it? The officer averted his eyes. He knew. But the system isn't for people like me. I escorted them away with a look, the way the wind escorts leaves away. No regret. They're not enemies. They're just spectators. And I'm not an actress anymore. I'm a director. That evening I went down to the barn again. This time not to look, but to hide. All the documents, letters, photos, I packed them in a safe built into the floor, which only my grandfather and I knew about. I didn't hide them from myself. I kept them safe from those who would want to erase them again. And then I wrote a letter. One. To myself. You made it through. Even when they tried to burn your essence, you flashed even brighter. You're not someone's secret now. You are a witness. You're proof that it's not just weeds that grow from ashes. Sometimes flowers. I enclosed the letter in an envelope and put it in the same box. And on top of it, a feather. Found by chance. A symbol. Because if anyone knows how to fall and rise, it's birds. And then just then I closed the safe. And I turned to leave. And there he was. My father. "Are you sure you've won?" I didn't answer right away. I just slowly walked closer, looking into his eyes. Winning isn't about losing. Victory is when you're no longer dependent on someone who thought you were weak. He was silent. For the first time, without sarcasm. No attempt to seize control. Just stood there. Alone. Small. "You'll still be Henderson," he said. Maybe, I nodded. But with the last name I choose now, and the story no one else will write for me. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the heroine put everyone in their place. When I came out of the barn and my father was still standing in the same place silent, as if he were glued to the ground, I realized that the finale of this family drama would not be with a shout, but with silence. He said nothing more. Not a threat. Not an excuse. Not even an attempt at a replay. Just watched me walk past, holding the safe key in my fist. He never looked back. The next day the calls started. First Thomas. "Sharon, the media wants a comment. One response from you and they'll back off." Then some voice with a cold tone. We represent the Henderson family. You will be offered an agreement. I hung up. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that if you don't speak, others will speak for you. And I had a voice, and it wasn't shaking anymore. I decided, if they wanted to hear my story, let them have it. Not through lawyers. Not through newspaper clippings. I wanted to hear it firsthand. I went to the very radio studio where I had once worked part-time as a college assistant. That's where my friend Martha stayed. She's 50 now, wears thick-rimmed glasses and isn't afraid of a microphone. Are you sure? She asked when I told her I wanted to go live. Absolutely. I'm tired of being a footnote in someone else's timeline. It was time to be a chapter in my own. And that night I went on the air. No script. No paper. Just me and Martha and a microphone. And thousands of ears on the other side. I told them everything. About my mother. About the will. About the burn check. About the barn and the letters. About the silence I'd grown up in. And the voice I finally found. After the broadcast, dozens of women wrote to me. Some were strangers. Some were old classmates who had their own Rachels, their own fireplace secrets, their own family members who knew only how to silence or destroy. And you know what they wrote? Not "you're brave." It was, "You've given me a language in which I can finally tell my story." Now that's a real victory. After the radio show, I thought it was gonna die down. But I forgot the main thing: when you stop being comfortable, you become dangerous. 2 days later, I got a call from the school where I once taught music. The principal coughed politely into the phone. "Sharon, we've started getting calls from parents. They're concerned about the hereditary conflict." "You mean the fact that I'm alive and still talking?" He hesitated. And that was enough. I took my Teacher of the Year picture off the shelf and left. No tears. Because if it took one radio program in my entire career to erase me from the list, I wasn't really on it. I got back to the farm late at night. There was a car parked there. The same one. Dad was inside again. Not in the house. He was in the car. He was looking at the windows. I walked over and knocked on the window. He didn't. Just turned on the headlights and drove off. Silently. There's too much silence in that name. They use it as a shield. And I'm no longer part of their wall. The next morning I got a letter. A real one. Paper. It was a copy of the will. Legally validated, newly stamped. With a note from Thomas. "It's now uncontested. They lost." I sat on the porch with that paper in my hands and thought, what now? Because when you fight so long for the right to be, when it finally comes, it's almost quiet. Too quiet. Because now you are alone. Without the purpose of being proof. Just you. Alive. I went to the attic, where my grandfather kept his old tools. I took the box labeled personal, and found another box. Little mementos, a birth certificate, tiny socks, a lock of hair pinned to cardboard. And that's when I realized. He knew. He knew everything. He kept everything. Even if he didn't say anything. I sat down on the floor, spread my toes, and just breathed. Deep. Quiet. Not because I was sad, but because someone, however silently, was protecting my memory. Not money. Not the house. But the detail that you were loved. At least once. Even by one person. Even in the shadows. The third day after the radio show, I got a call from a journalist. She was young, her voice was sharp. Like every sentence was a headline. "Sharon, I'd like to interview you. We're doing a story on women getting their voices back." I didn't say anything for a second. "Are you sure you want to hear from me? Because I'm not going to be comfortable." She laughed. "That's why we're calling you first." They met at a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and the parquet creaked with time. She sat down, laid out her dictaphone, her notepad, looked at me with admiration. And I felt tired. Because when your story becomes a symbol, you lose the right to just be. I told it anyway. Without pathos. No show. Just the way it is. And when she asked me, "How do you feel now that it's all behind you?" I looked at her and answered honestly. "Over? My girl, these things don't end. It's just that I'm not running now. I'm standing. Straight. With my eyes open. And I have nothing to hide." On my way out of the cafe, a woman called out to me. As old as my mother would be right now. She held out her hand to me. And she said, "My daughter was listening to you on the air." And for the first time she dared to tell her father what he was doing. You helped. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. Because if you've ever been a mirror for someone else's truth, you're no longer alone, even if there's no one else in the room. That night I went back to the farm and took Rachel's last letter out of the safe. There were only 2 lines. I hope she doesn't grow up to be like me. She'll grow stronger. I grinned. Guess no, Mom. I'm not stronger. I'm stubborn. I don't go higher, I go further. Not out of pride, but because standing still is the end. Then I took out of the closet the suit I was saving for the real thing. I went to the square. There were women gathered there. With signs. With faces where there was no gloss, only truth. They greeted me with applause. And I went to the microphone, and for the first time I felt no fear. Just the weight of my own story. My name is Sharon Ellis. I'm 43 years old. And I no longer ask permission to be me. The crowd was silent. But there was more power in that silence than in any speech. Because we are not statistics. We are pages that were written in silence. But now read aloud. A week later I packed my suitcase. Not because I was running, but because it was time to move on. The farm remained a part of me. But I didn't want to live among shadows anymore. I wanted to live among choices. My own. Before I left, I went into the barn. I sat down on the steps. I picked up an old Henderson nameplate that was lying in the corner, stared at it for a long time, then carefully wiped off the dust, took a marker and added a small Ellis next to it, not instead of, because I am both. I am the result, but I'm also the cause. In the city, I rented an apartment near the children's music school. I went there as a volunteer. The first girl I met was an 8-year-old with pigtails and a violin. She was afraid to play loudly. She said, "Mommy says don't stand out." I sat down in front of her. I looked her in the eye. If someone tells you to be quiet, it's not about you. It's about him. What about you? Play so that the walls breathe. She smiled. And played. The first note was tentative. The second was a little louder. And the third was like a scream that wanted to come out. And in that moment, I realized that not everything I'd lost was a loss. Sometimes life just makes room. Now I drink coffee in the morning. Bitter just the way I like it. No sugar. Because life is sweet enough without swallowing other people's lies. And when people ask me who I am, I don't say will or money or family. I say, I am a woman who is left standing. And that's enough. And if you hear about Sharon Ellis one day, know this. It's not just a name. It's a voice. And it will never be silenced again.